Today in our 2012 GMC Terrain, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit, part number RM-152. Whenever we go to flat tow our Terrain, we're going to need to have our lights from our motorhome go directly in line with the lights on our Terrain. That way not only are we safe, but everyone else knows what's going on. Our diodes are going to allow us to take that signal from our RV and send them to our Terrain so we can know what's going on. It's also going to protect our Terrain and our motorhome from those signals backfeeding and causing any damage. At the back of our RV, it's going to go from our 7-way and send the signals into our electrical connector at the front of our Terrain. Now the electrical connector and the cord's not included in our diode kit, but you can pick them up here at etrailer.com, and we'll go over a full list of parts that you need to safely flat tow your Terrain. Now from the front of the car, our wiring is going to run along the bottom and come up to our taillights, and our diodes are going to tap into our factory wiring. So we're not going to have to worry about having an extra bulb or anything else that's going to use the factory harness. But while we're driving around town normally in our Terrain, our brake lights, turn signals, and all other functions are still going to work normally. The thing I really like about the diode kit opposed to the magnetic lights is that it's not changing anything on the outside of the car, and it's a permanent installation. We don't have to do anything extra, running a wire from the front all the way to the back, putting lights on top of our car. We simply plug in the cord at the front of our Terrain, plug it into the back of our RV, and we're ready to go. So now that we've talked about how our lights are going to work, let's show you how we get the diodes installed. Now keep in mind this is only one component of our flat tow setup. For a base plate, we use the Roadmaster Easy Base Plate Kit with the removable arms. For wiring, we use the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit. For a tow bar, we use the Roadmaster Sterling All-Terrain Tow Bar. And for our braking system, we use the Roadmaster InvisiBrake Supplemental Braking System. Now, specifically to the Terrain, you're also going to need a stoplight switch. We use the Roadmaster Stoplight Switch Kit. You're also going to need a fuse bypass switch. We use the Roadmaster FuseMaster Fuse Bypass Switch for towed vehicles. We already have our fascia off because we just got done installing our base plate. Now we're going to want to run our wiring. You want to make sure you leave enough up front so that we can make our connection point. But we're going to route our wires. I'm going to go through the bracket. I'm just going to follow this wire here, which is for our charge line. I'm just going to follow it up into the engine bay. Just going to pass my wires through until I can grab them up top. And once I have a hold of it, I'm going to pull all the slack out until we just have just a little bit up front so we can make our connection. Now the reason why we're bringing it up into the engine bay is for a couple different reasons. It is going to make it a little bit easier to get back down and run it to the back of the vehicle without having to worry about the axle or the steering components, but also a lot of supplemental braking systems are going to need to tie into our lighting functions. So if we have a loop up here, it'll make it a lot easier to make those connections. Once we have a little bit of sticking out still, we can go ahead and secure our wires, zip tie it to some existing harnesses here. That way we won't have to worry about it falling back down or losing it. I'm also going to take a little bit of this wire loom. I'm going to slide it over the end. That way it'll help protect the wires, but it'll also kind of cut down on that bright coloredness right on the front of our vehicle. So I'm just going to slide it up, and really the only part we need to cover is the part that's going to be visual, or if it's close to anything sharp or hot that may damage the wires. So once we have it covered, we can trim off the excess and get some electrical tape and secure it to our wires. So I anchored my 4-pole wiring right over here on the driver's side next to the washer filler neck here. And now that it's anchored off, we don't have to worry about it falling back down. We're going to need to send this down towards the back of the engine bay so that we can take it underneath and run it towards the back of the vehicle. Now the easiest way to do this is going to be taking an airline tube or a coat hanger, something that's just going to keep its shape when you start pushing and pulling. And we're going to send this down and routing it down through the back of the firewall here so that we can take it down along with the wire. You just want to be mindful of where you're routing it. You want to stay away from any major heat sources or any moving parts because you don't want the wire to get damaged. With our airline tube sent down, we're going to attach our 4-pole wiring directly to it so that we can pull it down in the same path. So then we come underneath the vehicle, start pulling our airline tube until we can get our wire to come through. And then you want to pull all the excess slack all the way to the bottom. So my wiring came down right here, right behind my steering column. But since it's so close up here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tie my wiring to this line right here so it'll keep it away from the steering column itself. And then I can put another zip tie on these lines here and start routing it towards the back. Now it's nice and tucked away from the steering shaft here, and we don't have to worry about it rubbing. So now we're going to end up routing this wire all the way to the back by the rear bumper. And everybody's going to do it a little bit different, but I'm going to go ahead and route this, and then I'll show you how I ran it. So I zip tied my wires to some of these existing lines, and I just followed them back, go along towards the outside of the frame here. Then I went on the outside of my fuel tank, following it back. Then I had to go up and over the subframe, zip tying it to this brace here. Then I cut over, continuing it to zip tie it to some lines. And then finally I have it right here on my driver's side. So now the end of our 4-pole wire, we're going to need to separate them so that we can work with each individual wire. And we're going to want to separate them as far back to where we have it anchored down as we can. Now you may need to cut them, but you may be able to just grab the wire and start peeling them apart. If you do have to use a knife or anything to cut them, you want to be extremely careful not to damage the wire. You just want to separate them so that we can get access to each wire individually. And again, we're just going to separate them as far back as we can, all the way to the last anchor point that we made. Since we have all our wires separated, we're going to start with our white wire. Now this is going to serve as our ground, so we're going to want to go into some bare sheet metal. So right here on the side would be a good spot. It'll be tucked up away from the exhaust and out of the way. So we can cut our wire, give ourselves a little bit of extra room. And then we'll strip it back. And in our kit, they are going to provide us with a ring terminal. So we're just going to slide it over the bare end of the wire, and we'll crimp it in place. In our kit, they're going to provide us with a self-tapping screw. I'm going to take a 5/16 nut driver, and I'm going to secure it directly into the side of the sheet metal here. We're going to need to remove both of our taillights so we can get access to the wiring. So I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to pry these plastic covers out. And we're going to have 2 bolts holding our taillight in place. I'm going to grab a 10mm socket and pull those out. And whenever you go to pull your taillight out, you want to try to pull straight back as much as you can, because there are some alignment pins and you don't want those to break. If you're having trouble getting it out, you can get a piece of plastic or a plastic trim panel tool to come to the very edge, and while you're pulling back and working it back and forth, it'll help have it come out. So then we come to where our connector comes in. Go ahead and disconnect it by pushing it on that tab and pulling it out. Now if you'll notice, we do have some wiring going from here. This is for our trailer wiring. If yours doesn't have it, that's okay. We're only going to be working with the factory wires going to the taillights. So we're going to repeat that and pull the other side out as well. So we're going to need to test all of our wires to figure out what functions they are. I got my tester hooked up and the headlights are on my Terrain. So now I'm going to go through testing each wire to figure out which one is my taillights. So the second pin in, which corresponds with the brown wire is going to be for our tail lights. Now we can go ahead and turn the tail lights off and turn on the left turn signal. So now the left turn signal on, we're looking for an intermittent power source because it's going to be going on, then off, then on, then off. So our turn signal is going to be that first pin next to our taillight signal, which will be the yellow wire with the black stripe on it. And since this is a combined lighting system, which means that the turn and brake signals run along the same wire and go to the same bulb, that's also going to be our brake signal wire. So now that we have the left side done, we're going to go ahead and move over to the right side and check those wires as well. Now we got a few different color wires over here on the passenger side, but our taillight signal is still going to be that brown wire. However, our turn signal is going to be the one next to it, which is going to be the dark green wire with the white stripe. Now in order to make those connections, we're going to have to bring the wiring that we had at the back underneath up here. So to help us, we're going to take that pull wire again, we're going to feed it down through between the body and the bumper until we can meet up with those wires. Now on the driver's side, we're only going to bring up our yellow and our brown wire, and we're going to leave the green wire down at the bottom still. So we can take a little bit of electrical tape, secure our wires, and pull them up. You want to make sure you pull all the slack up on the wires. You don't want them to get caught underneath. And if you need to, you can always zip tie them to some wires up here to make sure they don't fall back down. So we're going to start with our yellow wire, which is going to be our brake and left turn signal. And if you remember on our car side, it's going to be corresponding with the yellow wire with the black stripe. So we're going to come downstream just a bit from the connector itself, and we're going to cut the wire in half and strip back both ends. And we're going to want to grab one of our diodes that has all the blue spade terminals on it. We're going to take two of them off and crimp it onto each end of the wire we just cut. Now for our yellow wire coming from the front of the vehicle, we're going to estimate about how much we need to get to one of the terminals there, give ourselves a little bit of extra room, and then we're going to cut the wire and strip back the end. Then we're going to take the last spade terminal off of our diode and crimp it in place. Now on our diode, you'll notice that we're going to have two in terminals and one out terminal. The two in terminals is going to be coming from our wiring that we ran and the wiring that's going towards the front of the vehicle on our taillight harness. Doesn't matter which side it goes in, you just want one on each side of the in terminals. And then the out terminal is going to be going towards the taillight socket itself. Now we can do the same thing, cutting our taillight wire and stripping back both ends. The only difference for our taillight circuit is we're going to be grabbing the diode that has the yellow terminal on it. So we can take our brown wire, we're going to again estimate about how much we need, giving ourselves a little bit of slack, cutting the wire. This time we're going to keep the excess wire in the other end and we're going to strip both ends of that wire. Take the yellow spade connector, and we're going to take both of our wires together, twist them together, insert them into our yellow connector, and crimp it down. And again, take our diode, the yellow connector is going to go to the in terminal. The wire coming from the vehicle harness is also going to go into the in terminal, and then the terminal closest to our taillight connector is going to go to the outside. Now, the wire that's coming out of our yellow connector, the bare wire, this is going to need to drop back down and go across to the passenger side. However, you're probably not going to have enough wire like we don't here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that excess white wire that we have from the ground and attach it here, and hopefully we have enough to get over to the passenger side. So we strip back the end of our brown wire, and we're going to take the butt connector that's included in our kit and connect that brown wire and the excess white wire together. Since it is on the outside of the vehicle, I'm going to take a little bit of electrical tape and I'm going to wrap that butt connector up, hopefully keeping out moisture and preventing any kind of corrosion from building up. So now we can send our wire back down to meet up with our green wire and go over to the passenger side. On the back of the diodes, we're going to have some double-sided foam tape that we can stick it to the body or wherever we see fit so they won't be rattling behind the taillight. Now, there's already a limited space back here, and we already have some extra wiring for our trailer wiring back here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug my taillight back in first and then see how I have to situate my diodes for everything to fit. So it looks like I could stick my diodes to the body right here. So I'm going to go ahead and clean it off and secure them using that double-sided tape on the back. Now that we have our diodes stuck, we can plug our taillight back in, line it up, and secure everything down. Replace our 2 bolts and the 2 caps. So we ran that brown wire that's connected to the white wire along with our green wire over behind the hitch here, zip tying it to the existing trailer wiring. And we have it coming out over the passenger side. We're going to use the same pull wire method to get it up top. So on the passenger side, we're going to repeat the same process of hooking up our diodes. So we'll start with our right turn and brake signal. It's going to be the dark green wire with the white stripe. And that's going to be going into our green wire coming from underneath. And again, the wire coming from the bottom and the wire coming from the harness on the vehicle is going to go into the in terminals, and the out terminal is going to go on the wire closest to the connector. So we'll do that same process for our brown wire, which is going to be our taillight signal, which if you remember, we connected that white wire to our brown wire to extend it. Then we can put our diodes against the body here, just like we did on the other side. Just want to make sure you give yourself enough room so that you can still plug the harness into the taillight. Plug it in, line up our taillight, then we can replace our hardware. Now with an extra set of hands, we can put our fascia back in place. Before we do though, we're going to go ahead and plug in the fog lights so we don't have to reach up underneath and get them. Now with the base plate being installed, we may have to work around the brackets and the points where it's going through. And once we have the middle lined up and everything's coming through, like our breakaway switch and our wiring, we're just going to go around the edges, making sure everything's lined up, and start pushing everything back in place. Just want to make sure you get all the clips lined up, and make sure it's seated all the way back in. Now that we have our fascia back on and our wiring is all ran, the next step would be to wire up a plug. So we're going to be using a 6-pole bracket because we're going to mount our wires up to a 6-pole plug. If you're using a different style plug, you're going to want to pick up the corresponding bracket, and we have a wide variety of them here at etrailer.com. So we're just going to line up our bracket And we're going to drop the included hardware down through the top. Line the bracket up so that it goes through both of them. And then we're going to secure it on the bottom with these locking nuts. Now it is going to be a little bit of a tight fit, but it's a lot easier to put this bracket on after you have the fascia on, so you can make sure that you have enough clearance for everything. So let's get them hand tight so the bracket will support itself. Then we can get the other nut in place. Then we're going to come back with either a 10mm or a 3/8 socket, and we're going to tighten up the nuts to secure the bracket. So we're going to pass all of our wires through the front of our bracket. And if you're wondering, this red wire is for a charged line that we put on our vehicle previously, that we're going to be wiring up to our 6-way as well. So after we have them through, we're going to need to separate our wires. And again, you can either just pull them apart at the end here, pull them back just enough so that we can get access to each individual wire, or if you need to, you can take a pair of cutters and cut right in between the wires. But again, you just want to be careful not to damage it. You just want to separate them. You don't want to cut into the side of the wire. And we're going to strip back the end of each one of our wires. We're going to take our 6-way, pull the dust cover off, and we're going to slide all of our wires through the back of the dust cover. You're going to want to push it as far back as you can, just so we have a little bit more room to work and it's not getting in the way. So just push it back into the back of the bracket for now. And then you're going to take your connector. Now we're going to have a bunch of terminals on the back, and they're each going to be labeled, so we're going to be able to hook them up to the corresponding wire. At the top, we're going to have TM for trailer marker, which will be our tail lights, which will be the brown wire. Next to that will be GD for ground, which is the white wire. LT for left turn, which is the yellow wire. RT for right turn, which is our green wire. The center pin is going to be an auxiliary, which is going to be our 12-volt power source for our red wire for our charge line kit. And then finally, we'll have one last terminal on the side here that's going to be marked S, and that would be for our brake signal. So we're just going to take a very small Phillips screwdriver, and we're going to unscrew the set screw so that we can get the wire into the terminal. And then again, you just want to take the corresponding wire, maybe twist the end so it's a little bit cleaner, and we can get it into the terminal easier. Put it into the terminal, and then tighten the set screw. One thing I do want to mention is whenever you're putting the wires into the terminal, you want to try to leave just a tiny bit of bare wire at the top so you're not crimping down that insulation. Because if you do get the insulation inside the terminal, you may get intermittent problems where it cuts in and out and not has a solid connection. So we're going to go around and put all of our wires into the corresponding terminals. After we have all of our connections made, we're going to slide our dust cover back over the end of the connector. And it's not a bad idea to take a little bit of electrical tape, tape around the end of it, that way it'll keep it in place and also keep out any kind of moisture or debris, preventing any kind of corrosion from building up. We can push our wires back behind the bumper, get our bracket in place, and then we can take the included hardware with the socket and secure it down. With the socket, we're going to get a couple screws. So we're just going to go through the front. And then we're going to have a locking nut that we can put on the back. Then we grab a Phillips screwdriver, either a 3/8 or a 10mm socket, and tighten up those screws and hold the nut on the back. Now one last thing we have to do is to test our wiring to make sure all the functions are working properly. I have the front of my Terrain hooked up to my tester to simulate the motorhome, and when I turn on the taillights, we can see the taillights come on my Terrain, as well as the left turn signal, the brake lights, and the right turn signal. So now we can hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. And that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit, part number RM-152 on our 2012 GMC Terrain.